Victor Wembanyama has been on an absolute tear lately, and it looks like he is trying to steal the Rookie of the Year award away from Chet Holmgren, and he's really finally establishing the true dominance that he will be capable of, maybe sooner rather than later. Hello everybody, welcome to Also Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Also, I want to mention real quick, the new main channel video is coming out in 2 days or so. Hopefully we hit that deadline, but keep an eye out for that. I'd really appreciate it if you clicked on it and watched as soon as you saw it. It makes a real world of difference. But with that said, today we're going to talk about a few subjects as usual from here on. I'm going to talk about Victor Wembanyama. I'm going to talk about some of this discourse around the number 15 for the Denver Nuggets and, you know, Carmelo Anthony and all that stuff. I'm going to talk about the Marvin Bagley trade I want to discuss. So first, let's get to Victor. The guy has been ridiculous, and that's not just me overselling it. If you take a look at his numbers over the last 10 games, he is averaging 21 points, 3.6 assists, 3.7 blocks, 8.9 rebounds, and he's shooting 32% from three, which obviously is still not good, but it is an improvement from what he's been doing on the season. I think he's also been better about his shot selection in general as the season has gone along. Also at 52% from the field, 84% from the line, which is pretty damn good. Guy's just been absolutely awesome. Obviously, a big thing we can attribute to this is Tre Jones being in the starting lineup. Ever since he has been reintroduced into the starting lineup, Tre has averaged 15 points and 6 assists on really good shooting splits. He's not turning the ball over, and most importantly, when Victor Wembanyama is in a position of advantage on offense, the ball is finding him. And I think that's happening more not just because of Tre Jones, but because there seems to be more of a collective effort by the team to make this happen. For what it's worth, I think Jeremy Sohan's playmaking can actually be a positive in the context of him playing power forward rather than point guard, which is what he's been moved back to, which is his natural position. I don't think Jeremy Sohan's going to be all that good going forward, but in terms of the playmaking aspect of his game that they were trying to develop with him playing point guard, I really think he has a secondary playmaking ability and he can really kill it in that role. But they definitely were asking him to do too much. So just in general, more playmaking on the floor, more finding Victor in positions of advantage. I also find he is settling for jump shots less. That's one thing that has definitely been a little bit concerning to me, is that there's times where it's like, dude, you can just put this guy in the basket, but you're shooting over him instead, and you're not necessarily shooting the highest percentage on those shots. To this point in his career, I do think that Victor will be one of the best mid-range shooters in the entire league at some point, but he's not there right now. And something that's definitely worth mentioning in regards to all of this, pretty pivotal here, Victor is only playing 24 minutes a game. He's been on somewhat of a minutes restriction pretty much the entire season. I feel like that minutes restrictions got even tighter as of late. So even in these shorter bursts and not being able to, you know, get multiple reps in, get full starters minutes, he is still putting up 21-9 and 3.5 assists and blocks. If you take the numbers that he's averaged over these last 10 games and put them into per 36, he is averaging 32 points per game, 13 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 5.5 blocks. Those are some truly absurd numbers. And if you watch these games, which I've caught a handful of them, it seems like he's more than capable of like true like star, for real, superstar even tier level production in the very near future. Like, I really think there's a good chance that second year Wemby is like definitively an all-star, definitively like a top 20 player in the NBA. It might be sooner rather than later. Based on the slow start to the season, I thought that maybe that might not be the case, but I think I, as someone who harped on how much the Spurs were misutilizing Wemby, somehow managed to undersell how much that's actually affected his counting stats. I mentioned in the intro the Rookie of the Year race. Chet Holmgren was winning that race pretty much universally, to this point. However, as of late, because of the numbers that Victor has been putting up, if he manages to maintain this kind of production, especially if he starts to get more minutes as the season goes along, I think he could ultimately end up having more impressive counting stats than Chet. And historically speaking, Rookie of the Year tends to go to the player who just simply has the most impressive counting stats. And, something like the Thunder, technically, I think they just moved up to number 1 in the league's power rankings, which I don't know if that's actually true, but that is where they were put on the NBA's official Twitter. I saw this. But either way, I don't know how much winning will factor into it. I think the race has become more interesting because of Wemby's recent production, and I think if we get, not necessarily this crazy level of production for the remainder of the season, but just like a more efficient and consistent 20, 10, and 3.5 blocks. He's averaging 3.2 on the season. Yeah, I do think there's a very real chance that Wemby can end up winning the Rookie of the Year award, which is not necessarily surprising. That's who the favorite was going into it. But he definitely lost a little bit of his place in those standings in terms of like being projected to be the guy. But it looks like he might be the guy now. So I'm happy to see this development from him. I'm happy to see the Spurs utilizing him more correctly. And I think that my overall takeaway is that a very dominant and superstar level Victor Wembanyama is going to be here sooner rather than later. Moving on to the Carmelo Anthony number 15 debate. This is something that was always interesting to me, that technically, I don't know if Melo is the best player in Denver Nuggets history. You could, before Jokic, I should say. Before him, I probably would give it to Alex English. The guy scored the most points in the 1980s. Melo did get them further than any Nuggets team did before. However, a Western Conference Finals appearance being the furthest your franchise has gone is really more indicative of the franchise itself and not necessarily Melo's success. And there's a lot of discussion because Carmelo had a recent podcast clip where he was talking about how he felt it was disrespectful and intentional that they gave Jokic number 15. I don't believe in any way that Melo is trying to disparage Nikola Jokic's game specifically, more so just calling out Denver as an organization. And the first thing I want to say just at the top, generally speaking, when a player has beef with an organization, pretty rarely am I going to be on the side of the organization. I'm just almost always going to side with an individual over an organization because I find more times than not the individual is actually correct. But I don't think that this is a case of intentional sabotage because, as many people have pointed out, it's not exactly like Denver's front office, when they were giving away numbers, had some crystal ball to look into the future to see that Nikola Jokic, in a matter of a couple of years, would become the best player in Nuggets history, one of the best players, and at this point, the best player in the NBA. They didn't foresee that future. I do want to say, however, there is a degree of this that is being left out of the conversation because the immediate retort is like, Jokic was drafted during a Taco Bell commercial, which, if you did not know, literally like the pick came bottom of the screen while a commercial was playing because it's the second round and nobody's watching at that point, and who gives a shit. However, that's not necessarily an accurate depictor of what Jokic's game was going into Denver, because he played a year overseas after being drafted by Denver, and from what I understand, he would have been one of the top prospects in the draft class had he not declared the year before. He was just now obligated to play for the Denver Nuggets. So when they gave him number 15, I presume that was after he was a part of the official, that was like when he became a part of the official roster a year after he was drafted, and there were now higher expectations on him than previously before. Now, that's still not seeing the future and seeing a two-time MVP, champion, finals MVP, and best player in franchise history. It's still not that, but it's not as though they just gave the number to a second-round pick thinking he won't be anything. Denver thought Jokic was going to be something by the time he was there. He got pretty significant minutes for a second-round center otherwise, especially when they had Yusuf Nurkic on the team, who was another young center who had a lot of upside. So it's not as though those situations are exactly as people are presenting it. I don't think he got the number directly after being drafted on a Taco Bell commercial. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure they don't give away numbers until you're a part of the active roster, and he was a draft and stash the first year. That said, I don't think that Melo necessarily did enough for Denver to be like, it's not like it was an automatic, well, number 15 is forever stored away. I don't think that luxury is gifted to that many players, you know. You have to be like a truly transcendent player, and like I understand that Melo was the best player the Nuggets had in quite a while. Denver Nuggets have a very weird history. I just want to put that out there. Like, they very interesting, like the teams that were good even are just weird rosters and kind of anomalies and different ways of building teams from what you typically expect. But Melo was probably the most traditional superstar type of player that the team has ever had. And they didn't get that much success out of it. And I'm not going to sit here and act like Melo wasn't a good player, but to act like he was like some super unbelievable beacon of success for the Denver Nuggets and they were like some amazing franchise with him, I just don't know if that's an accurate depictor, and I think you need that to happen in order to feel so confident for your number to be retired. You need to be something like LeBron in Miami or Kevin Durant in OKC. These are guys who haven't had their number retired officially yet with that franchise, but no one's worn their number since they've left that team, because like number 6 is LeBron's number in Miami, number 35 is Kevin Durant's number in OKC, and even with Kevin Durant leaving in ugly and not well appreciated fashion, he still ultimately had that number on reserve because of what he did for that franchise. I just don't think that Melo and what he did for Denver quite reached the threshold of being worthy of what he seems to think that he was worthy of. And that sucks, you know. I don't feel good about it. I'm not happy that that's the case, but I also think that it's a little ridiculous to act like it's not. Melo's allowed to be offended by it. I understand why he would be. This is personal to him. But I don't think Denver did anything wrong in this case. I think giving away number 15 was fine, even if it was to a player that they thought might be pretty good. Let's move on to this Marvin Bagley trade. So I think when I most recently talked about the Detroit Pistons, I talked about how much Marvin Bagley should be in the rotation, not only in the rotation, but like one of the most prominent members of it. But somehow he has been getting non-injury DNPs over and over again, despite being one of the most competent NBA players on the roster. Now, I do understand that we're talking about a low bar there. Competent NBA player isn't exactly super impressive. However, by contrast to what the Pistons have been working with, by contrast to the players that have been a key part of the rotation for Detroit this year, many of those guys are not competent NBA players. Many of them are guys who will not get another contract in the NBA, and I am almost certain that Marvin Bagley will be getting another contract in the NBA, probably a few. He's genuinely a solid offensive big man. Obviously has his weaknesses on defense, and you don't love that out of a center, but in terms of being worthy of NBA minutes, Marvin Bagley reached that category. And in spite of that, especially worthy of minutes on the fucking Pistons, in spite of that, he ends up getting traded. So my bad suggesting he should be in the rotation, because they just decided he shouldn't be on the roster at all after that. So to go over the details of the move, Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Livers, and 2 future second-round picks. I don't know for sure who those picks belong to. They might both be Detroit's. I don't really understand how second-round picks work value-wise. These could be good second-round picks. They could be bad. I don't really know. But they got back Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala, both of which were expiring contracts. So just to be clear, this Detroit Pistons roster did a salary dump move. Do you know what kind of position you have to be in as a team to be making salary dump decisions? Don't get me wrong, there's different contexts for why you would do a salary dump. However, being a roster who has a few NBA players on it and trading those players away, that is not one of those contexts where you're doing a salary dump, especially given that nobody of significant value is going to want to play for the Detroit Pistons. Anybody who's worth anything will likely get a better offer from another team, maybe not financially, but at least you don't have to play for the Pistons. Really, the only thing you're going to get out of a hypothetical free agency is you're going to overpay some role players. You know, you're going to do the Jeremy Grant thing again, where you give the guy the money. A lot of people go, whoa, that's a lot of money. And then you trade that player for further assets. And that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but that's also your best case scenario going into free agency. And the way that the Pistons front office is carrying themselves seems to suggest that they think they can do more in free agency than I'm certain they can. That I'm certain they cannot. You know what I'm trying to say. I think Danilo Gallinari could potentially be fun for them. Mike Muscala is maybe an NBA player. He kind of teeters on the line. And they are shooters, which is nice because the team has needed shooting. It's just the fact that you're giving away second round picks in this deal. It's to clear a relatively marginal amount of cap space for a team that's not going to do well in free agency. So it's just weird, and I don't like it, and I'm not happy about it. And I guess there's justice for Marvin Bagley, but then again, he's just going to the Wizards, so it's not like things are getting much better. Oh, I just thought about that. Can you imagine you're like on the Pistons and you get the wonderful news that you've been traded just to find out you're playing for the fucking Wizards? That's gotta suck. I didn't even think about that. Sorry, Marvin. That's it. Shout out to Nicholas for editing this video. His link is going to be in the description. Check out the Coping Hour podcast. It's my favorite NBA podcast. But that is it. I guess it's not only the NBA. By the way, it's other sports. My bad. I'm not putting you in a box, Nick. Okay. Bye.